On January 25, 1995, a shooting occurred at a restaurant on Blue Hill Avenue in the Grove Hall section of Boston, Massachusetts. It was mistakenly broadcast over the police radio that the victim of the shooting was a Boston police officer. The suspects were described as four black males driving a gold Lexus. The mistaken broadcast of a police officer down generated a massive response by police cruisers from several different districts. A chase ensued. The suspects led the police on a lengthy car chase spanning 3 police districts and several towns. The closest police vehicle behind the Lexus throughout most of the chase was an unmarked police cruiser occupied by a plainclothes officers Craig Jones and Michael Cox. Do any of those names ring a bell to you? Pay attention. Jones was the driver of the vehicle, and Cox occupied the passenger seat. The car chase finally ended when the suspects drove down a dead-end street known as Woodruff Way in Mattapan. When the suspects arrived at the cul-de-sac at the end of Woodruff Way, the Jones-Cox unmarked cruiser was the first police car on the scene and skidded to a stop on the left side of the Lexus. The second police cruiser to arrive was occupied by uniformed officers David Williams and James Bergio, I think is how you say it. Williams and Bergio pulled in on the right side of the Lexus. Uniformed officer Ian Daly arrived next and pulled in directly behind the Lexus. Immediately behind Daly was uniformed officer Richard Walker, followed by Conley and his partner Robert Dwan. The Conley-Dwan vehicle was thus the 5th police vehicle on the scene. Conley and Dwan wore plain clothes and occupied an unmarked police vehicle. As the gold Lexus came to a stop at the end of Woodruff Way, Cox observed one of the suspects, later identified as Robert Brown, exit the gold Lexus from the passenger side and run to the right towards a fence. In pursuit, Cox exited his vehicle from the passenger side, ran behind the Lexus, and followed the suspect to the right towards the fence. Cox described the suspect as a black male wearing a brown leather jacket. Cox, also black, was wearing jeans, a black hooded sweatshirt, and a 3/4 length black down jacket. Cox chased the suspect to the fence approximately 20 feet away. During the chase, Cox was about 3 feet behind the suspect. When the suspect got to the fence, the suspect began climbing over it, catching his jacket for a moment on the top. At that moment, Cox reached up and attempted to grab the suspect and pull him back down over the fence. Cox testified that approximately 2 seconds elapsed between the time that the suspect caught his jacket on the top of the fence and the time when Cox grabbed the suspect's jacket in an attempt to pull him back over the fence. Cox's attempt failed, however, and the suspect dropped down on the other side of the fence and started to run. Cox did not observe anyone else climb over the fence between him and the suspect. After the suspect landed on the other side, Cox took a step back from the fence, considering for a moment whether to follow over the fence. A moment later, Cox placed both of his hands on the fence as if to go over. At that point, Cox felt a sharp blow on the back of his head, like a metal pipe. The next thing he knew, he was on the ground, on his hands and knees, trying to get up. He observed a white male standing in front of him, wearing boots and a dark uniform. Cox was repeatedly kicked in the head, back, face, and mouth by several people all at once. The beating did not stop until Cox heard someone yell, "Stop, stop, he's a cop, he's a cop!" When the kicking finally stopped, Cox attempted to get up from the ground. When he looked up, he realized that there was no one around to assist him. Cox was forced to use the bumper of a police car to pull himself up from the ground. In April of 1997, a federal grand jury commenced an investigation into the beating of Officer Michael Cox. The grand jury sought to determine the identity of the officers who attacked Michael Cox and or deliberately failed to prevent the assault and to get medical attention for him once they knew he was injured. On May 29, 1997, Defendant Conley, an officer present at the scene, was called before the grand jury to recount the events he observed and the actions he took at the Woodruff Way in the early morning hours of January 25th, 1995. I'm going to continue this on part 2, but if you know the story that I'm talking about, please leave it in the comments. It's very interesting.